Now, the government quietly changed rules on Friday to allow unvaccinated New Zealand citizens to skip MIQ. Does this start to pave the way to drop vaccine mandates and passes altogether? And are we in for changes to the traffic light settings? Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is with me for more on that. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
And now I understand Cabinet is meeting today to discuss those settings and an announcement will come on Wednesday. Is that correct? And
Correct.
If so, why is there a delay?
That is correct. Just to give ourselves, we're meeting today. Cabinet will often make tweaks and changes to some of the options that are presented to us. It just gives us 48 hours to ensure that we can implement those. If there are any orders that need to be changed, that we can kick off the drafting of those. So it's still a pretty tight turnaround between decision and announcement, but we'll look to get that out as soon as we can on Wednesday morning.
Are you going to be able to give people at least some indication of where they need to be heading in terms of planning for their businesses or for the health sector today?
Yeah, so look, we have already given a really strong indication, and as have the experts, that for things like vaccine passes, we're actually with a highly vaccinated population, and that group of unvaccinated New Zealanders, which was always relatively small, many of them will have now been exposed to COVID-19. So it means that the vaccine passes aren't as critical as they once were for us. We've already given a really strong indication that once we're coming down the peak, once we feel assured that we're not continuing on the rise, that we'd be looking to change those up and also change up the way we're using mandates as well. So we'll give more details around that once decisions are made on Wednesday.
You've said that you don't believe the passes will need to be used as widely. Will there still be some situations where they will need to be used?
No, it's more of an indication that these are tools that would you want to just dump entirely, never to be seen again. Whilst they might not have a use for us right now, I guess the question is just preparation in the future, really. We know that this pandemic is still with us, and of course, whilst we hope it's much more predictable than it's been in the past, we do just want to make sure that we're always prepared. The same with the pro-COVID protection framework, what people know as the traffic light system. Some people have asked me why not just get rid of it entirely. We do know we'll likely experience another wave over winter, so it's just a matter of being prepared for everything.
With the mandates, the most recent polling on people's attitudes to that showed that 60% still support them. So why now? I know it's been a tough few weeks in politics with the government down in the polls. Has that had any impact on your decision to review these settings now?
No, not at all. And it's the same reason as we're reviewing them for vaccine passes, because once you've got a first big wave that's come through, it does mean a number of people who may otherwise not have been vaccinated have now had COVID. So it just changes up the equation for things like passes and mandates. We've also reached out to our experts to ask them to give us their opinion on the use of mandates, and we'll be using that in our decision making as well. It's not the case that you'll see us, for instance, drop them everywhere. We do believe there'll still be circumstances where, particularly where there are really highly vulnerable individuals, will still have a use, but we'll be discussing today just how far that use is.
So perhaps in the aged care sector, mandates will still apply? Those
are some of the examples you will have heard public health experts still talking about. But again, Cabinet hasn't had that discussion yet, but we'll be having that today.
So some would say that perhaps listening to or responding to changes in the polls is actually a good thing to do. Is this marking a time where you're perhaps shifting away from focusing on health as a priority and moving towards more of an economic response? Because clearly that has been the shift in public attitude.
So the point that I would make is that the major shift that has happened in New Zealand is Omicron has arrived. And so with Omicron arriving and our highly vaccinated population, it gives us choices to change the way that we are dealing. And it was always going to be necessary to do that. But that doesn't mean that everything goes out the window. There are ways that we can actually reduce down the restrictions as much as possible while still continuing to protect the highly vulnerable. We can do both. And that is what our ambition has been all the way through. But what I would say is that that's been the game changer here. Yes, of course, we hear people's frustrations. We listen. We try and alter up what we do to take into account what things people are finding really hard to implement or to keep going with. But we also listen, as we always have, to what's going to make the biggest difference to help New Zealand get through this, both economically and in terms of health, in the best shape possible.
Okay, but you're saying what's going to help people get through this, and what people are overwhelmingly saying now is that cost of living and their financial situation is actually top of mind more than COVID. So is that
Absolutely.
the direction you are taking now too? Are you saying we are going to focus more on our economic response now?
Look, my argument would be that we've done that all the way through. I mean, the fact that over $20 billion was spent on, for instance, wage subsidies and supports to keep people employed, and that has kept our unemployment amongst the lowest that we've seen as a nation, let alone in the middle of COVID. But, of course, cost of living has been one of the byproducts of this pandemic. It is having an impact on people. People are hurting. That's why you saw us move so quickly on when we saw just prices continue to rise with the war in Ukraine causing that extra pressure at the pump. It's why we went to moving the 25 cents off per litre through excise.
Yeah,
but it's also why at the end of last year, we could already see, Melissa, we already knew that we were likely to have this period at the beginning of the year, which is why we also moved on the family tax credit. So that comes in on the 1st of April and will help 60% of families as well.
So what you're saying is, we've got Dr. Rod Jackson on the program this morning, who is saying that basically if we do see an end to mandates anytime soon within the next few weeks, we are letting down our most vulnerable people. But you're saying
I think you will have just heard me give you a bit of a range of what we're looking at with mandates. We're not looking to drop them for everyone, no.
But also what you're saying is that now we need to focus on the economic response. And businesses have been calling for that all along, to be fair.
Do you know what? Listen, I think the point that I would make is that we have done both all the way through. All the way through. We knew we needed to protect lives and livelihoods. As a government, you're always having to juggle competing demands. Are we worried about cost of living and acting on it? Yes, there is no silver bullet. There's not one thing that's going to change it for everyone, but we are absolutely doing what we can.
Okay.
Are we also trying to continue to manage a pandemic? Absolutely. Even when people don't really want to talk about it and they want it to be over, it's still our job to manage it. And we've not changed our approach. We're moving with the evidence and with the experts. And probably it'd be interesting to hear what Rod has to say after he's heard the decisions that we've taken.
Okay, so what do you say to businesses who have been largely affected also by mandates? I've had numerous businesses contact me who have had to stand down staff on full pay who haven't been able to or haven't wanted to get vaccinated. In one case, I know a family business had to shut down entirely because of how much that cost them. What do you say to the businesses who've had to recently lay off staff because of mandates?
Well, just to be clear, the government-imposed mandates were relatively limited. So health, education, defence, police, and those who are working around our border and MIQ spaces. The only other group were those who were choosing to, and we tried to create options in the vaccine pass framework, but those who were operating with vaccine passes. Otherwise, many businesses chose to use them themselves. And so often I've heard examples that actually were choices made by employers. But again, we might be debating something that actually is likely to change. And so probably best to have that discussion on Wednesday.
Okay, and just quickly on the traffic light settings, we know that the peak perhaps has passed in Auckland, but that there's a different situation throughout the rest of the country where they're still seeing an escalation in cases. Would there be a scenario where there might be split traffic light settings, or would there be a scenario where we will still stay in red but the rules under red might change?
Yeah, so the latter. So what we're looking at is just the framework itself. So just looking at, with all of the data that we've had now over the last 4 months, have we got those settings right? Are there changes that we could make to each of those levels as we're considering the use of vaccine passes? So that's the decision making rather than whether or not we're ready to move down yet.
Okay.
We will be putting in regular review periods, though, around the movement down the traffic light. But as you can see, we are still, as you're saying, really stretched in many parts of the country with the number of cases that we have.
So we'd be staying in red, but red will look different.
We're looking at whether or not that's right, whether or not we need to make changes at red and at orange in particular. Green's pretty permissive and will feel a lot more normal to people.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, thanks very much for your time on AM this morning.